So having these conversations, I think, is just, it's very important. Refusing to do nothing is going to continue to lead us down the road of destruction. And I think that's the point where we're really at a tipping point with that. And people are starting to realize that because they're starting to experience it. And sadly, I think before humans change, the majority of humans change, they have to suffer. They have to suffer through something before they realize, what the hell? This does not need to be this way. Why are we doing things like this? What are we doing? And I think we're at that point right now. Ben and Tish, hi.
Hello there. How are you, Tamara?
Welcome back. Episode 4. We finally made it. A lot later than expected, but we're here. Technical issues are a beast. Okay, so we are in episode 4 of Rights of Nature. And today we are talking about the global rights of nature victories from Ecuador to the Great Lakes. And I think this was an important podcast to do because there are rights of nature victories. We did have the Lake Erie Bill of Rights that we talked about. That was a victory, but was overturned. But there are actual rights of nature legislation across the globe that are actually in effect today. And we are going to talk about those today with Ben and Tish, our experts in residence here. So we're going to dive right in. And my first question, Ben, is for you today. Where did the modern rights of nature movement begin, and why did it emerge outside of the United States first, do you believe?
Well, yeah, when we talk about the modern rights of nature movement, what we're talking about is the attempt to include nature and ecosystems within the structure of law and to recognize, when we say rights, there are high values that are protected by law. And so, frankly, the modern rights of nature movement did not start outside the United States, but frankly, started in the United States. And I'll give credit where it's due, and that's to Christopher Stone back in 1972. He was a professor of law in at the University of Southern California, and he was offering kind of a thought experiment to his law students. There was an ongoing case at that time that was between the Disney Corporation and the Sierra Club, was taking them to task for plans to build a entertainment amusement park in the Sierra Nevadas. And of course, the Sierra Club thought that was a bad idea, and they were attempting to block that from happening. And, you know, when you look at a case like that, usually the corporation has the weight of law on their side because we don't have rights of nature recognized in the United States at the moment. But what Christopher Stone was proposing to his students was, he said, well, what if that ecosystem that's being considered for citing this big project, what if it actually had rights of its own? You know, not protections like environmental protections, not regulations for how much harm can be done, but instead, what if it had the land itself, the forest, the creatures that live there, the waterways? What if they had legal rights of their own and they could be enforced, obviously by human beings? Forests aren't able to show up in court, but by people who have the authority to speak on behalf of and in the name of those ecosystems. And so that was actually, it got a lot of attention all the way up to the Supreme Court, where Supreme Court Justice Douglas pointed to Christopher Stone's idea and said, well, if this were the case, if ecosystems were recognized to have legal rights, then the outcome of this case might be different than it is right now under current law. Because right now, nature has no rights. It's property. It's something that can be used by humans who own it and in whatever way they want to. But to say that the modern rights of nature movement, where it began, I'll say that Ecuador gets a lot of credit and due credit for having adopted a new national constitution back in 2008 that recognized the rights of Pachamama, which means Mother Earth. So the rights of nature was recognized by the country of Ecuador in 2008. 2 years earlier, in 2006, the very first rights of nature law in modern memory, at least, was introduced in Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania. And CELDF, and I was involved in that campaign back in 2006. And it was really based on conversations that staff members had been having about Christopher Stone's idea. So I give credit where it's due, but Christopher Stone's idea, Professor Stone's idea, was really a thought experiment, and he wasn't assuming that this is something that was going to happen anytime soon. But in 2000, leading up to that, 2004, 5, and 6, we were having discussions. What if that idea could be implemented rather than just being a thought experiment? What if we actually made it a political experiment? And what if a community in the United States would enact a law that recognized their local ecosystems to have rights and assigned the people of that community as the enforcers of those rights? So anyone in the community could step forward and say, I'm here to advocate for the rights of the ecosystem, when a project that would harm those rights was being proposed. And so that law was enacted. There was a project that was planned to bring river dredge from the Hudson rivers and the Delaware River, and to bring that, and we know PCB laden and other contaminants laden sludge was going to be brought in, mixed with fly ash from coal-fired plants, which contains plenty of mercury, and that was going to be used to fill in an open pit coal mine in Tamaqua Borough, which we know likely would have leached into the groundwater and would have done harm to the community itself. And so the folks there thought that was a bad idea. But that really,
Did you
I think
stop
we
it?
can.
Did the Pennsylvania? You said it was enacted. So what exactly happened to it? Because we haven't spoken about that one.
Well, Tamaqua was the very first in the world, really, anywhere. Now, that's not to say that it's the only place on Earth that ever respected nature as a rights-bearing entity. I think that you'll find, and we can talk about this more in a bit, but indigenous communities of people have long had that relationship with nature, but they don't ensconce it in law. They don't need a law to tell them. It's part of their culture. And so they carry it inside as a value that really puts obligations on them to treat nature and their local ecosystems with respect, as though a relative, nature as part of their community, part of their family.
So did Ecuador then, because that was in 2006, and then in 2008, Ecuador enshrined rights of nature into their constitution. So was that on the back of what happened in Pennsylvania as well, or was that like a separate sort of situation?
Well, they were connected by the fact that CELDF, our folks, were asked to travel to Ecuador and to consult with the Constitutional Congress that was considering including the rights of Pachamama in the new Constitution. That's not to say that CELDF inspired them. Frankly, they had their own track to get there. And part of that was they have a large indigenous community, a large indigenous population in Ecuador. And so there was, in many ways, that sense of connection to nature. But putting it in law was something that was conceived in a law school and carried out in a little town in Pennsylvania in 2006, and then internationalized in 2008 by Ecuador.
And Ecuador has it for their entire country.
That's right.
Correct. It's not just a river or a lake, like in some other locations.
That's right. And you mentioned the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, which Tish was very involved in enacting with the folks in Toledo, Ohio, recognizing rights for Lake Erie. And you mentioned that it was overturned by a court. But I want to say that it was the law of for a year and a day, exactly, yes, is what it lasted. And that it was you can say overturned, but we've got quite a few communities in the United States that have followed suit since Tamaqua and since Toledo. And I'd say just roundabout numbers, only about 10% of those have been legally challenged and overturned, and the rest are on the books. That doesn't mean that they would hold up under legal scrutiny, because our American laws are based on the rights of property more so than the rights of people or nature. And so,
which we're fighting against,
which we're still working on that. But in fact, those laws, to say have they succeeded or failed, I think the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in New York has been introduced based on the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. And by the way, I don't think the Lake Erie Bill of Rights failed, was attacked. It has been stopped for now, but I don't think that the authority of people to assert their rights and to protect the things they value most, I don't think that fight's ever going to be over.
Oh, heck no. I think we're just in the beginning of it, right? Really,
I think so.
In some respects.
For sure.
So, Tish, was there a global shift then when Ecuador enshrined rights of nature into their country, into their constitution? And what significant role has it played internationally since that happened?
Well, I mean, like Ben covered, a lot of this. Yeah, it started here, right? And that's, but then that was just, like he said, a small borough in southeast Pennsylvania, right? And just to add a little tidbit, like an interesting little trivia fact about Christopher Stone, because it kind of ties into our idea of, giving people confidence and taking risks and all these things. The reason the Justice Douglas actually got a hold of Christopher Stone's papers because Christopher Stone stalked him pretty much, and waited outside his where he was, and his car was parked, and he actually kind of had it in an envelope and made sure he got it that way. So
nice.
Just to talk about
nowadays,
taking actions that normally we don't think of. He's like, I don't know what's going to happen, but he did, and so that's why it actually got into his dissenting opinion in that case. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known about it. But back to the global and Ecuador, I mean, Tamaqua was this small borough, and it didn't get much media attention. I mean, hardly anyone knew about it at all, and it wasn't challenged. So even though it was important, but then when Ecuador came along and put it in their constitution, that obviously, so in only 2 years' time, from 2006 to 2008, going from a small local borough in Pennsylvania to a national constitution, that's a big step. So I think for the movement, that was a huge gain. That obviously did get more media attention, and it also gave more credibility, I think, to the idea, and also building confidence of people all over the globe, including in the U.S., to consider this idea more and attempt to implement rights of nature. I mean, this also led to, court cases being filed in Ecuador using that constitutional rights of nature language. And we'll get into that later, I'm sure. But so that was, I think, highly influential. And as Ben mentioned, the reason other parts of the world, like Ecuador and New Zealand and places like that, I think it's been much easier, is because their indigenous population, they're smaller, obviously, than the United States. They're not as much of a melting pot, I guess, as this country with all these different influences. And the indigenous populations are still there, like cohesive groups in those countries. So I think that's another reason why globally, it's taken off there. So in this country, it's much harder just based on our size and the different cultures and demographics and everything in this country.
Yeah, I think the culture in this country has a lot to do with it, for sure. So after Ecuador, you mentioned New Zealand, and that's the Wingwani River, right, in New Zealand that was given rights of nature. Is that correct? Is that the correct one?
Wanganui.
Say that again?
Wanganui.
Wanganui. So I'm pronouncing it way wrong. I even looked that up. Wanganui. Is that correct? Wanganui.
That's how we say it. I don't know if it's correct.
Okay. Always say it, yeah.
Okay. And then there's also the Atrado River. Where is the Atrado River?
I believe
maybe I'm maybe I've got that one wrong. I might have that one wrong.
No, you're right.
But where else? So we have New Zealand, we have Ecuador. Where else globally outside of the United States is rights of nature in effect right now?
It's
legally.
actually really moving along in lots of places. So there have been, and it's a bit complex because the rights are recognized in various ways, sometimes by courts, sometimes by legislatures, sometimes by local provinces of a country. Just as, we worked at the local level, at the municipal level, county levels, and so forth. So yeah, the New Zealand rights of nature laws got a lot of media attention globally. They're a little different than what we see in Ecuador because they went at it in a sort of a more traditional way. When they found rights within the Wanganui River, they were actually negotiating these rights in a sense for many years with the Maori people of New Zealand, the original people there. And there's a great deal of difficulty trying to mediate the differences, the cultural differences. The Crown government, as they called the government of New Zealand, because it was settled by the British Empire and so forth, their legal tradition doesn't allow for recognizing what our Western culture calls inanimate objects to have rights.
Yeah.
Except for corporations, of course. But the way they approached it, instead of as with New Zealand and as we've done in the communities in the United States, to recognize those rights as embodied within nature itself or the specific ecosystem that's being identified in the law. What is done in other places, and notably in New Zealand, was they recognized legal personhood for those ecosystems, just like it has been done with corporations. Legal personhood is a concept that says that a legal person, just like a human being, has certain rights, including the right to sue and be sued, the right to own property, things like that. And we've been a bit critical of that approach, of the personhood approach, because we don't need. I think that nature and ecosystems have rights that are distinct from human rights, and so applying human rights to the whole of nature is not a good fit necessarily. And it's also maintaining the subordination of nature and ecosystems to human law, because legal personhood is a fictional concept. It's a fictional entity is what that legal personhood is recognizing. And it's referred to as a legal fiction in the law books. So it's not just a critique that I'm making. As a fiction, it's now subordinated to human law, to New Zealand law, rather than fundamental rights like the right to free speech or the right to be free of religion or to have your own, whatever religion you choose, the right to confront your accusers and so forth, the right to sue for harms and so forth. Those rights belong to human beings, but does a river need to have the right to free speech? Well, perhaps you could argue, yeah, the person speaking on its behalf needs to be able to speak freely on its behalf. Those things already belong to human beings under human law, where there are those recognitions of rights. But what happens if a river floods, say, a housing development? If it can be sued, if the river can be sued as a legal person, that puts it in jeopardy of losing something like perhaps the settlement for the harm might be to allow the developer to harness the river for hydroelectric, for instance. Well, the river doesn't have a bank account, so we have to get our value out of it somehow. Maybe we'll just take the water out of it and bottle it and sell it. Or, I'm just making up scenarios here, but legal personhood has the potential of making the ecosystem that has been granted that personhood vulnerable to litigation by human beings as well. And that's not an ideal situation.
Well, and based in our current system, the way it works too, the takings, right? So let's say that a community or a country or a county or something like that had already set up like funds for restoring an ecosystem or the river that where the harm had already occurred, right? And so they've already got funds accumulated in this account for restoration projects. Who knows? I mean, a corporation could see that and think, well, we can go after that money, by filing a lawsuit against the river for the harm that it's causing us and lost profits, just like they do to our communities now, right? And then take those.
that would be insane. But that's what would happen, right? It would. That's truly what would probably happen.
Well, which suggests that the rights of nature movement is still in its infancy, and we're still working out what does it mean? What does that whole idea of rights for nature mean? And how is it going to be enacted and litigated too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's use an example, if we can, from New Zealand, from the Wanganui. What does that law say about that river? What is the legal right of that river for, I guess, the entire community, the entire ecosystem that it runs through? What is allowed and what is not allowed with that river? Do we know that information?
Well, I don't have the language in front of me right here, but just from memory, the right to flow naturally, the right not to be impeded, the right not to be poisoned, things like that. In the laws that we've drafted and the laws that were drafted in Ecuador, it's the right to exist, the right to flourish and to naturally evolve and to be restored when harmed. And those things, I think, are also part of the rights of the Wanganui. But again, they're couched within legal personhood rather than simply as stated rights inherent to the river.
And has there been any challenge to it from corporations in New Zealand?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm sure there have been discussions about how it affects various projects and so forth. But I'm not on top of all that.
Just to tell you too, so it doesn't look like we don't know anything. The Atrato River's in Colombia.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
My mind was shot.
And one of the other things is, this is like just shows how much it's grown. Like at the beginning,
right.
10 years ago, it was easy to keep track of these cases, right? Because there was only a couple of them. But because it has grown and expanded, there's a lot of different examples. And to know the ins and outs of all these cases, we would have to research. We do have them and we have discussed them. It's just that there's so many now.
And I think that goes back to an important point that we discussed early on. I think it was in the first episode when we were just talking about what rights of nature was. And we were talking about it relative to bringing it throughout the Great Lakes Basin. Like there's the bill in the New York State Assembly currently, but every state would have to have its own rights of nature law because each one would be different based on what is needed for that ecosystem or that area. But when Ben was talking about the difference with the legal personhood, that it's not about giving legal personhood to nature, because that would open it up and make it vulnerable to how we exploit each other in this society for sure. And so having that distinction, I think, is very important. And I just wanted to try to clarify that for people to understand that a little bit more, that it's not about giving nature the rights that we've given corporations, because I've even used that phrasing. Like if corporations can have rights, then nature can have rights, right? And I need to stop saying that. Clearly, that's not the concept of what we want here.
I would argue that corporations shouldn't and nature should.
Right.
That's true. But the real, to Tish's point, the rights of nature movement globally has been moving very quickly. In the United States, not so much. I mean, we've been working very hard at it, but for the United States, the cultural change would be really pretty significant before the rights of nature could be recognized in the correct way. There are any number of attempts to co-opt rights of nature by industry to pretend that they're doing something with carbon trading, with natural asset companies where they monetize nature. They say, oh, yeah, it has great value. For instance, this forest is worth so many billion, and that river its water is worth. we're not looking to monetize it. That's not the value we're talking about. And to say, there are mountains and rivers in India that have been recognized as having legal rights. The Mar Menor in Spain has been recognized. That was big news just a few years ago that one of the countries in the EU actually recognized rights of an ecosystem. And so it's a kind of a bay on the eastern coast of Spain that was recognized to have legal rights. And it's happening elsewhere. I know there are great efforts being made in the Philippines to recognize those systems. I mean, we could catalog a lot of cases where rights have been recognized and where rights are their efforts to bring them forward. So it's beyond anyone's ability to just know all of it, to put it all together. We were at the forefront, but it's not a movement that's owned or controlled by an organization or by a community. It really is a cultural shift. It's good to see that it's a global one, and it's important also that we begin to have the conversations about what do we mean by rights of nature. And how can we best protect the natural world with human law? And there are ways that are better than others. And there are lots of ways that are being tried.
It's on every continent now of Earth, right? I would say every continent has been touched in some way by the rights of nature movement. And it's being used. And again, I know you're interested in if there's any patterns with the global rights of nature movement and things like that. And I think what's really important about it's not so much as if they've been enacted into law and passed as it is that they're providing a tool for people to educate their communities about rights of nature and that cultural shift we keep talking about. It's something many places around the globe maybe have never heard of. Others, it just is inherent in themselves, their own cultures. So it opens up, I think, space for these meaningful conversations and discussions about how our legal system actually works and how we consider nature property and not as living entities, how nature is basically invisible under our current environmental laws and supposed protections. As I stated earlier, too, they also provide, I think, some type of courage and confidence in people and communities, knowing that other places and people are going down this same path and learning from those experiences. And I think it also opens up space for these deeper discussions like we're having, right, about morality and values and ethics and our connections to nature. Something, like Ben has mentioned too, the indigenous culture is practiced since the beginning. And what I've experienced and seen is that once people make these connections, it doesn't matter as much what the courts say or do, because people don't go back to believing that nature is property or only a resource for human profit, but that it's really the source of all life on the planet. And so I think the cultural shift continues whether the law is upheld or not, and or whether the project is stopped or not. So the fact that in Ecuador, there have been these court cases where rights of nature have been upheld, those provide inspiration, right, for the instances where they've been overturned. And so there's been a lot of hard work on the ground by rights of nature organizers and activists all over the world. And all of these efforts are what keep pushing the movement forward. And actually, the problem we're seeing now is that we're at the point where we're seeing a lot of co-opting of the work. And that's unfortunate. But I mean, I think it's to be expected. It's happened in every prior movement.
It means you're successful. at least what you're talking about is
in a weird way, right?
Right.
And so, we have some examples of this, and just if you want, I mean, I can give you a couple.
Yeah, please.
But one example is this idea of putting corporations on the board of directors. And in 2022, there was this Scottish beauty company. It's called Faith in Nature. And they announced, we're the first company in the world to give nature a formal vote on corporate decisions that might affect nature. And they've now written a book about it. And so they're in the news again a lot because they're promoting the book. And what I have said before, I mean, really, we have to think about what's the goal here. Is it to make nature fit into the human capitalist system, or is it to make humans understand and fit back into nature? What are we trying to do here? And there's a lot of issues with nature, because I mean, on a board of directors, how many are there? Are there like 10? And nature gets one seat on the board. Who gets to fill that seat? I mean, who gets to pick
Yeah.
the person who is in that position? So, there's a lot of questions that come
Lots
from
of
that. And why are we
questions.
doing it? Another one would be like passing laws that only focus on the human benefits of doing this, right? So, like one example we have is the right to clean water, and that's for humans only. But they're calling it rights of nature, so it's different, right? So the right to clean water could be, well, we want that right because people will want to come build vacation homes here, or they'll want to build, because the water's clean. Who wants to build vacation homes in a place where the water's polluted? And so in that case, it's like, well, why are we, you have to question, like, why are we doing this? And so a lot of these, if we don't question it, it's like, and if it goes unchallenged, I think it can work to dilute, neutralize, and defeat what the movement is about, so.
Yeah, I would say if you're doing a Rights of Nature campaign to clean the water, to build vacation homes, to further exploit the area that's not what it's supposed to be about. To fit it into capitalism, basically, like you said.
Well, exactly.
It's not the point.
The community leaders will say, well, that's good, right? That's good for the community.
Right.
It's going to bring development here. So again, I mean, we have to think about one of the things CELDF's doing, because now that we're at this point of that happening, we've seen, and we're going to start generating, we're going to come out this year with our first one, a State of Rights of Nature report. And it will describe and evaluate like important global rights of nature developments, so that we can kind of help people understand and figure some of this out. And we'll try to objectively point out how they may help the movement or potentially harm the movement. And we're also working as advisors to the creators of the Eco Jurisprudence Monitor, which started out just to track rights of nature all over the globe. But they're also now seeing that there's so many of these, like, how do we do this? And so we're working with them to figure out ways how to showcase some of the good examples and explain why others might be problematic, so that it's a more useful tool for people to use, I think. So I guess to sum it up, it's good news that the movement is growing and gaining traction, but we also have to remain aware that, what are some of the end goals, and we have to work together to not allow the bad or the harmful examples spread, I guess. We also on our website have principles. I think Ben might have mentioned that in an earlier episode, just as, not that they're solid written in stone kind of things, like the 10 Commandments or anything, but it's, these are some principles that could guide us into saying, and people can add to them, but, this is what true rights of nature, what we're really trying to get at here.
I think people are hungry for this, and I'm going to tell you why. I had a couple of posts go a little viral this week, and they both were around data centers, rights of nature, celebrating the ecosystems of some of the good things that have been happening in the Great Lakes Basin region. Both of them went a little viral this week. And in the comments, talking with people, a couple people even mentioned the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, which made me smile, made me very happy because prior to talking to you all, I hadn't heard of it. Of course, I lived away for a really long time, right? And came back, but I hadn't heard of it until I connected with you all. And so that made me very happy to see that people were talking about this. But I'm going to tell you, people, everyday people that you would never think would be environmentalists are hungry for this conversation. They are starving for it. And so right now, with everything is just aligned the way that it has, right now is the perfect time to have this conversation, because people are listening and they are going to absorb it and they are going to understand it and they're going to ask the right questions, because everyone is sick of being exploited. Everyone is sick of their water being taken away from them, their electricity being taken away from them, their ecosystems being destroyed, not be able to go play in the lake to have your dog run in the water because, as you stated in the last podcast, sick and died from the algae blooms. So I think that all of this is the perfect timing with what you all of the groundwork and the legwork that everybody has done for 20 years with rights of nature, I think is coming to a point where everyone is ready to listen. The majority of people are ready to listen at this point.
Yeah.
And I've learned that was verified for me in just these two posts alone.
Yeah. Getting involved in rights movements of any sort, particularly rights of nature movement that challenges a lot of our cultural presumptions, it's not a short-term thing.
Right.
People constantly want to know, what can I do within the next 2 weeks that will stop Project X from ruining my community? And the answer is not much, because the whole legal system has been constructed in order to make it impossible for you to stop projects that are profitable and that do harm at the same time. The harm has not been illegal. What's illegal is stopping it. And that's an upside down situation. Our laws don't at all respect rights. They don't respect the rights of communities to protect their own land base. And the rights of nature movement, as we've been involved in it for longer than anyone, really, as far as an organization goes. And our thinking has evolved a bit as well, which is to say it's not just about legal rights. It's about our actual human relationships with the natural world. It's about what responsibilities we bear, and much more close in terms of indigenous thinking, when you start talking about responsibilities that people bear towards their relatives that aren't human beings, but they are living creatures. They consider them to be their relatives, North American indigenous people particularly, that I'm familiar with. And that's a different way of looking at things. And it requires a different mindset. And it's very difficult to bring people to adopt that mindset when they look at their property and they say, well, this land, I own so many acres and I could make so much money on it if I sell it to the loggers or to the frackers or whatever it might be. It's true that an individual might do better by kind of betraying nature and saying, yeah, I'm selling you into slavery here. And the downside, of course, is that future generations aren't going to have anything if we continue on this track, on this way of doing things, which is another indigenous perspective and an indigenous value, is to look to 7 generations into the future, is what many American Native peoples talk about, is what will be good for them. Because if we take them into account, we'll make decisions that aren't just based on what's good for us right now.
Yeah, gosh, that's such an important statement. That's something that I had learned recently also, looking into the seven generations. And what is it going to be like for them?
And I was going to say, one of the, your comment about seeing some posts go viral in the comments and stuff. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, timing, right? And like we have like 50 years of this environmental protection regulatory system, and we're now seeing the impacts. I mean, it's hard for people to deny. And I think of the Indigenous, my friend Sundance again here, who said, what you do to me, you do to yourselves, or that idea that what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And we're seeing, I mean, we have a sicker population. Our young people are sicker. The cancer rates are going up, ALS rates, chronic disease is going up, autoimmune, so it's like, it's not like, Ben, when you would describe property, right, and the gun, and, you have the right to own the gun, but you don't have the right to shoot me. And it's like that. I think that's coming to a head because communities have all been touched by all this sickness and illness. And, they've also been duped by this regulatory agency, just like I was in my community and all that, and realizing that they're not really they're not going to protect the environment. They're there to protect the corporate profits. And so all that is coming to a head, I think, and people are so now our messaging, I think, is resonating with more people.
Oh, gosh, yeah, it 100% is. So to kind of hone this in a little bit, because, talking about what we've just been talking about, the messaging, the timing, what would you say to people who, I wouldn't reach like I did with these two, just these two initial posts on this subject, who think that rights of nature is too radical or unrealistic? So what would you say to those folks?
You want to take it, Tish? That's too juicy, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I like, well, I would say, right, the cases in Ecuador show people that it's not unrealistic at all. I mean, that's real human judges, right? In a constitutional, the highest court level in the country, that are willing to rule in favor of nature based on the arguments using the inherent rights of nature being violated or under threat. So as for radical, I mean, I still don't understand why it's considered radical for people to actually practice real democracy where they live by allowing people to vote on laws to protect nature and themselves by recognizing rights of nature. And I don't understand why it's considered, radical to recognize Lake Erie or nature as a whole being as having rights, but it's never described as radical to consider a corporation as a person having rights. Like, to me, that's, I said it again at a talk this week. I know. And I was like, do you realize they never had to go march in the streets, right? They never had to carry signs. They never had to call their legislators or anything to fight for these corporate rights. They were just handed to them because they're in cahoots, right, with the government. And so that, but anyway, that's, I don't know. I talk about the example of the cloud forest a lot, the Los Cedros cloud forest, and that decision, and I mean, we describe it as the precautionary principle, I guess, which is shouldn't be radical, because when I describe it to people, they go, well, that sounds right to me. That's how it should be. I could, I took actually some quotes from the actual court decision conclusion just so people could hear, like, this is what judges wrote there. So you can see how common sense it is. So like,
and give a little bit of info what the cloud forest is. Just a brief background on what that is.
It's an ecosystem in Ecuador, right? And there was a mining project that was supposed to take place there. And because rights of nature is enshrined in their constitution, a group of people who live in that area, so residents of the cloud forest community, it'd be like saying the Lake Erie watershed, people. So this is the Los Cedros ecosystem. They filed a lawsuit saying, no, this mining project can't happen because it's going to violate the rights of nature, the rights of the people who reside here. And so they made their case in court, right, as to why it would harm it. And the judges ruled in favor. It was 9 judges, 7 of them ruled in favor of the cloud forest's rights, and 2 had dissenting opinions against. And you can read those. We have them on our website. We translated the case, and we actually put some highlights on there for you. We can send you the link. But one of the conclusions, so like on the rights of nature, this is something the judges wrote. They said the rights of nature protect ecosystems and natural processes for their intrinsic value, thus complementing the human right to a healthy and ecologically balanced environment. The rights of nature, like all constitutional rights, are fully justiciable, and consequently, judges are obligated to guarantee them. And then they also, they kind of separated out certain arguments that you make in a lawsuit, you make separate points. So they also had the right to a healthy environment. And they wrote on that, the right to a healthy environment under the Ecuadorian constitutional framework and international instrument not only focuses on ensuring adequate environmental conditions for human life, but also protects the elements that make up nature from a biocentric approach without losing its place as a human right. This right has an individual and collective dimension and obligates environmental authorities to adopt public policies and regulations that promote and strengthen the harmonious relationship of human activities with the environment in which they are developed. So, it makes total sense.
Complete common sense.
It's realistic.
That we even had to go to court to get that opinion, right? That's wild.
It is absurd. It is absurd.
Yes.
And to your point about what would you say to people who say rights of nature is radical? I think it's radical that it's legal for a corporation to put poison in our drinking water. I think it's radical that it's okay for a corporation to come in and take down an old growth forest. It's not just trees. It's not just lumber. You just wiped out species of fungi and salamanders and birds and all kinds of animals that can't live there anymore. You've had a huge impact. And if that isn't radical, what is? But, we're the environmental terrorists in some people's mouths, the way they say things. The people
Yeah.
who don't want the environment to be harmed are the terrorists. What are we terrorizing? I guess
Capital, I
profits.
guess.
Capitalism.
And
Yeah.
if
Yes,
we're
capital.
terrorizing profits, profits must be the highest value in the land. And what do you know, they are. And I think that's crazy, and I think that's radical, and I think that needs to be changed. And if we had a democracy, which I would say, and I think Tish agrees that we don't, if we had one, we'd be able to say, no, you can't destroy our drinking water. No, you can't drill down into the ground where we get the same ground we get our water out of and pump toxic chemicals into it so you can force gas out of it, so you can sell that gas, send it on ships to other countries that want it, because that's where it goes. This isn't for the domestic population. This is for international profitability for large corporations who then buy up everything that has nothing to do with gas and oil. You know, they buy up a lot of other corporations, and they own. I mean, this is about consolidating ownership of land, of means of extraction, of retail. All of it is being controlled and steered by very few people, and that is not a democratic process. And if capitalism is the religion of the West, let's just say it, and let's just decide if we all want to go to that church or not.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, the other
I'll
thing.
say it out loud. I don't want to go to that church.
Yeah, and one of the other criticism, you know, people like, again, Indigenous people use things from the earth too, right? It's not that we can't use, you know, because that's the other criticism I'll hear, you know, and it's about why are we using it and are we giving back, right? So like we may have to take some of the gas out of the ground. I don't know, you know, like whatever. We need heat in cold climates. We need certain things, but it's again how we do it. And who gets to make those decisions and for what?
Who's benefiting? Who's benefiting
Exactly.
from it ultimately?
I mean, we supposedly are so brilliant. I mean, we supposedly are just sending this rocket up again to the moon, but we can't figure out a way to use some of the resources on this planet without destroying the whole ecosystem. I just don't, you know, buy that. I think it's only because it's the cheapest way to get it out, right? And so the profits are higher. That's the problem.
100% it is, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
and you're
my
not, by the
gosh.
way, going to find any good ecosystems on the moon or Mars.
No, that's for sure.
This is where the best stuff is, and we're not taking care of it.
And we want to destroy it so we can colonize other planets. It's wild thinking.
Well, they're thinking there's other minerals and things up there too, I'm sure. And how do we mine those? And how do so they're already like always thinking about that and how much more money they can make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's bring this back to the Great Lakes. Because I want to have a little bit more of a conversation about that. And Ben, I want to include in this, I'm going to give this question to you, and I'd like you to include a little bit more about Indigenous leadership. We've brought that up in several podcasts and how important it is because Indigenous communities are already in tune with nature. It's what their culture is. It's always been what their culture is. They've never left. They've never discarded that culture. It's always been one with nature. And as you just stated a little bit earlier, that they consider it our relatives, right? Other parts of nature. So with recognizing rights of nature for fresh water, the freshwater system within the Great Lakes Basin region, governed across borders and jurisdictions, what do you think that would look like? Because as we stated, we've got 8 different states here that are Great Lakes Basin states, plus Ontario, Canada, within the Great Lakes Basin region. We have a lot of Indigenous tribes within this community. A lot of them are constantly fighting because, you know, they're considered water protectors of the Great Lakes, and we disregard that with them. So governing this across the Great Lakes Basin, and obviously this isn't all worked out in anyone's head, but what could that possibly look like?
Well, to begin with, it would be, for instance, in the case of the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, it was one city that the people decided to put a measure on the ballot that would amend their city charter. Their home rule charter is like a local constitution for the city of Toledo. And it could be argued that one city recognizing rights of one Great Lake doesn't carry much weight. I mean, these are people who their drinking water was ruined because agribusiness and its hand in allowing what's called nutrients, so nitrogen containing fertilizers and so forth, letting that drain into the lake, which is not natural for it to receive so much. And that caused the algae bloom that poisoned the water. People couldn't, as Tish related a while back, that it meant that the water you couldn't drink it, but you also couldn't even touch it. Your pets couldn't have a drink of water. You couldn't take a shower in it. You couldn't do anything with it. And that lasted for a couple of weeks. That isn't going to stop happening because the agriculture as a corporatized food production mechanism, that's their shortcut. They use these fertilizers that do harm to the soil and to the water and to the aquatic life in the waters. Rights of nature recognized in Toledo would have given some authority to the people in Toledo to hold responsible those who were causing the problem. So strict liability was part of the legal enforcement of those rights, which means that the agribusiness corporations could be held liable for the harm that they were allowing to be done. In New York State, if New York recognizes the rights of the Great Lakes ecosystem, there is a bill that we were requested to draft and has been introduced into the legislature there a few times. We've modified it a little bit to, we talked about this, I think, last time, that we've modified it so that it does recognize the treaty rights of Indigenous people and wouldn't interfere with those, and also recognize the rights of local communities to enact their own laws locally to protect the rights of their local ecosystems beyond what the state does. That could have a strong effect for the communities to hold liable any actors that would violate the rights of their local ecosystems. It would allow the state to hold responsible those actors, whether they're mostly corporate and government actors, that do enough harm to the ecosystems to register, to see the harm affecting the communities of New York State. What happens if, going down in the future, we see provinces in Canada and the rest of the Great Lakes states recognizing those lakes as rights-bearing entities? Now we have the communities of human beings surrounding this ecosystem agreeing that they hold it in high regard, that they need to protect it, and they're going to, and they have the ability in law to hold responsible those who do harm, those who violate the rights. I mean, unfortunately, in our culture, coercive law is what's used in order to really compel people to honor rights, to protect things that the communities around those lakes think need to be protected. If our culture had internalized the same value system that Indigenous people have, I mean, non-colonized Indigenous people, because, our ancestors were Indigenous at one point too, and we got colonized, and we see the world differently and not respectfully and not in terms of a right relationship with the natural world and with the other than human living things. So those laws could be used to compel the kind of respect towards the natural world that is required for it to continue and to support human life as well.
I want just to add to that, Tamara, I mean, to your original question, why and how would this work or look around the Great Lakes and bringing Indigenous into it? And it's, again, because it's always everything we've been talking about. It's like examples, and the CELDF organizing model has always been like that, whether it's community rights and local communities that, one takes the step, right? And then the next one maybe sees it, and the next community next to them, and the next community. And so I see the same thing with the Great Lakes. Like Toledo led the way. Now New York, that led to New York, and maybe New York will lead to Michigan, and Michigan will lead to Pennsylvania. So then, and Canada. And so I don't know what it is about us humans, but we feel better, right? We like it better when someone else goes first and has set an example. But when it's a good idea and they see good things, like imagine if there was a court case like New York's passed, and there was a court case like in Ecuador, and they saw judges ruling and saying that the Great Lakes, have the inherent right to be healthy. And so you have to stop putting those plastics in it, that plastic plant that they want to put there. That then encourages the next and the next, So, that's the beauty of movement building. Every past movement has worked the same way. And so we'll learn from each other's, what works, what doesn't, and hopefully it'll just keep moving forward that way until all the states and the countries have it in place.
Yeah. I had a question for you about what happens to regions that refuse to evolve their legal relationship with nature. But I think that question answers itself, honestly. What happens if we disregard what we are doing around? You can look at a satellite photo of the Great Lakes and see immediately the results of ignoring it or not addressing it in the proper way.
Yeah, that leads to the liability issue we talked about earlier, and I kind of call it collective responsibility. So, if that community decides, one community they want, or state or whatever wants polluting projects because they've fallen for the idea of the money and the jobs or whatever, well, if the other community next to them or the state next to them has evolved in their thinking about rights of nature, they're going to be held liable, the one that hasn't, right? So that could serve as a deterrent, like when they go, whoa, we could get in trouble because this next place next to us recognizes the rights, and so it's not going to be one thing or one silver bullet. It's not that simple. That's how we're trained to think, right? Like, oh, here's the problem, here's the solution. You follow steps X, Y, and Z, and then you get to the end result. And it's like, well, we talked about that at the Truth Reckoning and Right Relationship event. It's, we have to be willing to experiment, and things may not turn out as we hypothesize or whatever. But that's, again, to where the Indigenous knowledge and wisdom, I think, is so important, because they do have the examples, right? And the wisdom from the past, and know what works and what doesn't when it comes to protecting ecosystems. And so we should definitely pay attention to that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, as we say in Western culture.
Yeah, for sure. And then even farming, if we would listen to them with regard to farming, we'd be so much further ahead than we are. Honestly, it's like we'd evolve at some respects. I was at the conference in Cleveland that you just mentioned, and it was fantastic. Very glad that I went, met some really incredible people who will be on this podcast in the very near future as well. But I think that's the important point, is that we have the conversations together out loud. We talk about what is working in other areas. We learn from legislation like the Lake Erie Bill of Rights and why it was overturned, not because it was bad legislation or because people don't deserve their water, clean water. It's because of our judicial system, right? It's because of our system why it failed. In and of itself was not a failure. And so having these conversations, I think, is just, it's very important. Refusing to do nothing is going to continue to lead us down the road of destruction. And I think that's the point where we're really at a tipping point with that. And people are starting to realize that, because they're starting to experience it. And sadly, I think before humans change, the majority of humans change, they have to suffer. They have to suffer through something before they realize, what the hell? This does not need to be this way. Why are we doing things like this? What are we doing? And I think we're at that point right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's, the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, maybe it's the mother of radicalism too, because people whose water gets poisoned can be radicalized a lot quicker. And I'm saying radicalized in a positive way, because we want to get to the root of the problem. That's what radicalism is really about. Let's get to the root of the problem and solve that, instead of playing around with the symptoms, and let's stop pretending we're fixing it by regulating how bad it is.
Regulated destruction. That's a term I've been using a lot because of you, Ben.
Yeah. So regulating the rate.
It hits it home for people. I'm telling you.
That's not,
Yeah.
that's not environmental protection. That's just not what it is.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't also share with your listeners that, this isn't easy. I think we've mentioned it in other podcasts, but you expect pushback, because the more this grows and takes hold, the stronger the pushback's going to get. And we're even seeing it in Ecuador now. So just in the past few weeks, there's been news out of Ecuador about the United States and Ecuador launching a joint military operation against designated terrorist organizations in Ecuador. And so, what we've seen in other countries that have done that, they label environmental activists and organizations as eco-terrorists. And we're seeing it here starting in this country as well. So, to just be prepared, but again, like when Ben's talking about, we're being poisoned, like what we're all talking about, right? Like, so you have to remember, what are your values and what are you fighting for? And is it worth it? Like your kids being poisoned in the future, the next 7 generations. I'm like, yeah, they're going to push back.
If we even get to that far, right? We're not going to get there if we keep up with these data centers because of the diesel generators that they use. They emit fine particles. They emit nitrous oxide, and they emit PM 2.5, which operates like lead. Like once you inhale it, it's irreversible damage, right? When you ingest lead, it's irreversible damage when you have lead poisoning. And I've been reading up on this, and it travels through the air. And one of the documented studies on this is that it will create children who grow up around this. They will have underdeveloped lung capacity. And so imagine, like, and we're putting them everywhere. Like there are hundreds upon hundreds of them in the Great Lakes Basin region. It is insane, the number of data centers popping up here. It's going to affect generations. It isn't just going to affect what's happening right now. It isn't going to just destroy where we're at right now, which we may be able, if we can shut them down, recover in 100 years. But you can't reverse what happens to the developmental stages of a child if their lungs underdevelop because they're constantly being poisoned by the air that they breathe.
It's not just lungs, though.
We're not even going to get to seven generations.
It's their mental development too.
Oh my God, it's all of it. Yeah.
Thinking skills, all that. And a sick population is more docile and easier to control. So that's,
and
for sure.
If there was another nation that was imposing these things on us, we would be screaming,
losing our mind, wouldn't we?
We've got to go to war. We got to stop this. But no, it's our own society. It's our own government that issues permits that allows things to happen to us legally. It's not even what's happening illegally. It's what's happening that's permitted by state and federal governments.
Yeah.
And Rights of Nature is meant to change that.
Yes. And I think we have a perfect platform to bring at least the 40 million within the Great Lakes Basin together behind this. We're going to do it. We're going to do it together.
No small number.
No, it's not a small number whatsoever. Are there any final words from either of you regarding this topic today? I know we kind of bounced around a little bit just based on the flow of the conversation, but is there anything that you feel like needs to be said that we haven't said?
The future is where things need to be said. We need more people out speaking for nature. That's what needs to be said beyond what we've said today. We need to have more voices joining to speak for the natural world, for our relatives out there. They are really our relatives. We evolved right alongside with everything that we can encounter in the natural world. It's been there evolving right alongside of us. And, that's a couple of billion years of shared experience. We ought to respect each other. We ought to take care of each other.
And I would say, and because we focus today on global, and I know a lot of time, that's important because you can, see the depth of the movement and, and all that. But to then come back locally, because we can't really make a change. I personally can't make a change, in the Antarctic or over in Europe, but in our own community. So, it's good to know this stuff and globally and where the movement's going, but then come back and look at your own community, because I think that's where you have the most impact.
Yeah. And then, Ben, to your point, what we've said and what I've learned from you all, humans are not separate from nature. And so when we say more people speaking of nature and defending nature, it's also defending ourselves.
Exactly.
Right? Because we are not separate from it.
Let's let's have a reunion. And I mean, with our family, with where we live. To Tish's point, let's recognize that the nature in our backyards, that's really something to cherish. That old kind of put down called NIMBYism, not in my backyard. Oh, that as though, well, people are just selfish. They don't want to put up with something that other people will have to. It's not the way I see it. It's about not in my backyard because it's the one I've got. It's where I really have a responsibility to protect it. So you're darn right, not in my backyard.
It doesn't mean, though, then to move it to someone else's backyard. But then again, they're allowed to stick up for their own backyard.
Right.
And I'll go over to theirs and help them when I'm done protecting mine. That was the big error, one of the big errors in putting together a form of government in this country, where the decision was made the federal constitution would not mention or recognize local community government. And the states don't have to recognize local community governments because law has been evolved, Dillon's rule and preemption and so forth, that take away self-governing and democratic decision-making rights from every single American where they live. I like to say, if you don't have democracy where you live, show me on the map where you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for another great conversation, and we will see you on the next one.
Yep.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thanks, Tamara.